When everybody thinks of a hybrid, at least if you know a little bit about cars, you always think of the Prius. You don't think of something like the Insight, another dedicated hybrid from that era. You don't think of something like the Volkswagen Jetta hybrid or Camry hybrid. You think of the Prius. The Prius is the token hybrid vehicle and will be for the rest of time, or at least for people that were alive in 2009 to 2016. On the internet, there's a lot of sources on how the Prius came to be, but there's not one concrete video. So just like Scotty did with the history of Toyota, I'm going to make a complete history of the Toyota Prius. We're going to be talking about every single generation, the boardroom that they were talking in, some quotes that happened when they were coming up with the G20 project. G stood for global, and I think it was 20 or 21. We'll get into that with the beginning sources, but first let's break down the eras that we're going to go over and the 10 parts of the video. Alright, well, here is the general storyline shifting pattern we're going to go through here. Now, there's going to be other stuff added in, but we're going to start with the concept, then cover the first few years, then cover the second generation, then the third generation, the hybrids that came along the way, then the official Toyota Prius family, then that time when they came out with the new Prius, it was all kind of radical, then when the family died off and they gave it all-wheel drive, and then the modern macabre, just basic Prius that they came out with, which might end off the Prius lineage, I don't know yet, but it seems to be selling strong, so let's not make any assumptions yet. Without further ado, let's get into the concept. Now, unlike most concept cars, this didn't start with an idea, but rather with a person. It was the summer of 1992, and Eiji Toyoda was looking at a few different things, or at least putting them into consideration. He was thinking about Toyota's brand image and what changes they'd make to lead it into the 21st century. He was thinking about air pollution in very urban areas. Not a good thing. He was thinking about the longevity of cars. The auto industry hadn't existed for that long, and now that it has existed for long enough to see its own byproducts, the cars weren't aging well. It wasn't somebody bought a car and they kept fixing it and fixing it and fixing it. Eventually, it'd make its way into a junkyard where it would not be reused. The use of Earth's precious materials, which don't regenerate that quickly or quickly enough for us to keep farming them at the rate that we do, and overall climate change. Except he had a problem. He wasn't as involved in Toyota as he used to be. In 1982, he stepped down from being the president of Toyota and stepped into being the chairman of Toyota. Then in 1992, when he was about 78 to 79 years old, he stepped down and became the honorary chairman. Now you may say, well, if he was the honorary chairman, sure, of course he had enough power to push something like that. I mean, he's an honorary chairman. Well, in Japanese companies, the term honorary chairman isn't a job. You don't have responsibilities. It essentially means you were a chairman at some point and you're honored. So, you still have ties within the company, but you're not going to board meetings and you're not the chairman and you've been replaced. But that doesn't mean that you're completely outside of the company. So even though he had these ideas, and if he was chairman, he could have pushed them, he didn't have the same power that he had after he had stepped down. So he needed to contact someone in Toyota now, the current chairman. So he reached out to his friend, who was the replacement chairman after him and served as president when he was chairman, Soichiro Toyoda. Soichiro liked the idea, a car for the 21st century, a car to lead Toyota into the future and make sure that GM and the Americans, and especially the other Japanese car companies, didn't catch up to the beacon of hope that was Toyota. He liked it so much that he decided that this was going to be an official Toyota product and that he was going to invest money and created time to work on this project. Have a name, and this project was no different. They called it the G21 project. G for globe. Global. It was going to go global. It was going to be huge. It's the future of the auto industry. And 21 for, of course, the 21st century. The goal of the G21 team was to create a car that just had a regular gas engine, that was about the same footprint as a Corolla, and got around 47 miles per gallon. Now, today that sounds like a lot, because a lot of cars can achieve that. Back then, like the Toyota Yaris, the GL Metro could easily get 47 miles per gallon. They just wanted to improve the engine in a few key ways, some new technologies like direct injection. There was a new type of automatic transmission that acted more like a manual, letting you get more miles per gallon, let the engine rev a little bit higher to be a little bit more efficient, or rev a little bit lower depending on where you're going. More computer-controlled stuff. They didn't want a hybrid. They didn't want anything crazy. That wasn't even remotely on the table. Now, if you're overambitious like me, you may be thinking that the G21 team, the original one before they gathered and were disbanded and stuff, you may have thought that they came up with a car. They came up with the Prius, the hybrid, and everything, and these were the outlines they created. No, the original G21 team was just created just to come up with the guidelines for the project. We forget how slowly stuff moves in the corporate ladder. This team wasn't there to come up with the actual car. They were to come up with the guidelines on which the actual car would be built. All they knew is that they wanted a car for the 21st century. They had to make some achievements. It needed to be some size, some shape, and this is what they came up with. So, in early 1994, the original G21 team disbanded. They sent the report in to the board, and the board created a new team, this time under the leadership of Takashi Yukimata. They finally realized that, you want to know what, direct injection and this new type of automatic transmission can only get you so far. We're not going to be able to achieve 47 miles per gallon, so we need a hybrid. This happened in around June, July 1995, and they started working on the hybrid powertrain system. Now, they did a lot of testing, and I mean a lot of testing. There were several different options here. There was two main different options which they were arguing about, though, according to, there's this big article on it, according to this, and according to other sources that I have. They were trying to decide, and this is what Honda ended up going up with, on one big motor, that way they wouldn't have to spend on two little motors, one big motor, or one big motor, one small motor, one big motor attached to the engine permanently. It would act like an alternator to start the engine, and then when the engine's driving, it could act like a generator. It would spin the motor and do stuff. But when it really needed power, it could kick on and then spin and then help the engine do stuff. Or they could have two motors. One attached to the engine to act as a generator all the time, even if the engine is running and it needs hybrid power, and to act as an alternator. And then a second, bigger, electric motor that would actually do the driving of the car. This is more expensive because there was two electric motors, but it turned out to be somewhere in the middle. In the end, they decided on kind of both. So the little motor still acted as an alternator, so it'd start the engine up, but it'd also be a generator. The original idea was that the big motor would spin the transmission, which would spin the engine, but that didn't make any sense. So they chose to have the small motor act as an alternator because it was bolted straight to the crankshaft. And yeah, it was a pretty good design. Now, what's the difference between the Toyota hybrid system and the hybrid synergy drive system? The answer to that is nothing. It's just naming. Would you rather have a Toyota hybrid system or a hybrid synergy drive system? Yeah, hybrid synergy drive just sounded cool, sounded like very 90s, retro, to us now, but back then it sounded like the most futuristic thing in the world, so that's what they went with. Now, ignore all the writing here, it's all terrible, but hey, Grok Imagine did a pretty good job, it's a Corolla with a hybrid system back then. It's pretty good, pretty happy with this drawing. We'll get into this in the next section, but there was actually another car that also had a hybrid system called the Honda Insight, except it had IMA, Integrated Motor Assist, which was more like the first option. A bigger motor bolted straight onto the engine that would help out when needed and act as a generator, so kind of a two-in-one combination, but we'll get more into that later. And thanks to their work, here's the concept car that we got. And here's what the car looked like. Now, this is a concept car, and you can notice a few things, like a few areas where they kind of cheaped out, which, again, this car wasn't going into production, so I don't blame them. Like, notice the bumper. The bumpers in the front and the back are extremely the same. They were not the exact same model, but I'm sure the CAD designs were extremely similar. They also gave it that little rectangular rear exhaust pipe. I think that's kind of neat, but the only issue is, like, the oil and crap likes to build up at the bottom of that pipe and the air can still get out, so it wouldn't drip out as nicely as it does on a normal pipe. The interior is pretty nice. You got that Toyota screen. It wasn't a touchscreen. You had to operate it with the controls. I believe the final version was actually a touchscreen. Then you got those, integrated dash controls. Overall, it was designed just to be a car that was basic and standard. It also had a few weird features that they were going to add in, like you may notice there's a glove box on the driver's side. It's not an AI image. That was a feature that they were working on. This also was realistic but kind of unrealistic. These had the tendency to have an overheating battery, so on the final model they had to add a little vent towards the back of the window. I'll point that out to you in the next section, but this is what we got. I think it looks really good, actually, and notice the proportions of it. This does not look like a Corolla. The hood is taller, the trunk is fatter, but it still had very large windows and decent trunk space. This is very similar to, I would say, like a 2006 Camry than the 90s Camrys of the time. Stubby, little short back, barely a flat part past the rear windscreen. And then on the front, the hood, very tall, very stubby. Overall, a fantastic design. Now, I actually like this better than I like the actual first-generation Prius. First of all, because the lug nuts were hidden away. That's a big thing. I just hate cars with 4 lug nuts. I just can't stand them. So I like that it was hidden away behind, the nice star-shaped hubcaps. I like the color. I think yellow was an excellent choice. I like the plastic cladding. That's more original. But, of course, Toyota wasn't going to go with this design because even though it was one of the most friendly-looking cars in the market, if you're already taking a chance on a new technology in this 90s car that you paid, $40,000 for, you're not really going to want to experiment with too much other than the powertrain, right? Well, with that is the end of the first section. Let's move into section 2. Alright, it's 1995, the Prius concept has already been unveiled, and Honda's aware of this new Toyota hybrid project that they're working on. But before we get into first-generation Insight versus first-generation Prius, it's time to get into a little bit of history, which a lot of people lie about. Now, sometimes if you search into Google what was the first hybrid car, they'll give you something like the Benz Patent Motorwagen, a car that was created like millions of years ago. That's an exaggeration. But a lot of times they'll say, for some reason, the Honda Insight, and that it was the first to launch in the United States, which is technically true, but a lot of people forget that, believe it or not, the entire world doesn't just consist of the United States. Now, I'm guilty of being very United States-centered on this channel, as I have a good excuse considering I live in the United States. But believe it or not, there are other places in the world that are, in fact, not the United States. And if you take those into consideration, these are two very good sources. One of these is a Honda dealership that wrote up an article that was probably sent out to them by corporate about they stopped making the Insight, now let's do a little history. And the other one was from Toyota's newsroom. The first generation Prius was launched in 1997 in Japan. And guess what? If we're doing worldwide, what was the first ever hybrid car? Believe it or not, like the other article says, the Honda first introduced the Insight in 1999. The Prius was, in fact, the first ever hybrid car, not the Insight. A lot of people say, oh, the Prius is cool, but it wasn't the first. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. In Japan, and guess what? Toyota wasn't guilty of this. Honda also launched the Insight as a Japan exclusive. So you can't say, oh, well, Toyota launched it as a Japan exclusive, so that doesn't count. I think Japan still counts as part of the world. And I know this is kind of sour. This is like what people on Twitter argue about, like dumb stuff, like what came first, the chicken or the egg. But I'm just saying here that if you actually look at history and you look at when the cars were launched, the Prius came before the Insight, people. It's a fact of life. It just happened, so we have to grow up and accept it. I'm making this out to be bigger than it is, but yeah. And I mean, Google, every single time, if you ask a car nerd which one came first, they'll always say the Insight. That's just not true. Well, we've talked about the entire G20 project, and this is the car that we got. This is a 2000 Toyota Prius, or at least somewhere around there. It was the same car in Japan in 1997. Now, there's not many distinctive things on this car, but let's just get into it. First of all, this was a sedan. It had pretty much the same dimensions as a Corolla of the time period. Now, there's nothing too interesting on the car, except for that little vent you see up behind the quarter panel. Now, the way that this cooling system worked for the battery, again, batteries get hot. You need to cool them, because when they get hot, they don't work so well, and they also catch fire. So they would pull heat, not really heat, you don't want heat, but it'd pull air from the interior of the car and then exhaust it through that little triangulated hole at the back. Nothing too crazy, it's not going to be like a hairdryer, but it's just a little quirky feature on this car. There's, in terms of the exterior, there's not a whole lot to talk about. It's just your standard run-of-the-mill Toyota-ness, which, as we'll learn when we start putting the Insight in the picture, was a really big help for sales, because, I mean, if you're taking a chance on a hybrid, this new technology, you don't want to be driving around a space potato. This was designed to be the ultimate family car. Now, for the interior, Toyota wanted it to look like a normal car. They wanted it to not really stand out in dealerships, but they didn't want to, like, all of this to waste. They didn't want to make the super cool car that they spent millions of dollars engineering just to say, hey, this is a Camry Corolla thing with some weird stuff in it. So in the interior, they went all out. This thing had a touchscreen in 1997 as standard equipment. It wasn't a trim package, wasn't an option. You got a touchscreen standard. It also had its weird digital gauge cluster, which it would keep for literally every single generation after that, except for the modern Prius, which is a betrayal to the Prius as a whole, which I'll talk about later. So yeah, in the interior, we got some weird wacky stuff. On the exterior, it was designed to look like your run-of-the-mill Prius. Let's just take a minute to just reflect on the Prius's design. Not in like some weird creepy way, but just take it in. It was pretty standard, looked like a normal sedan. It was a normal sedan. The interior was a little bit weird, had some new features. It was just cool enough where people would look at that when they're going to buy a Corolla and say, you know what, I have a couple extra $1,000 to spend on a car. Instead of maybe bumping up to a Camry, why don't I get this new Prius thing? So without further ado, let's introduce its competitor, the Insight. Now let's talk about the Insight, but briefly, since this isn't a video about, the Insight, which will come later. The Insight, the first generation, was designed to be 100% efficient, or at least what Honda thought would be 100% efficient. They gave it a manual transmission. Now, why would you give a car a manual transmission? You see, Toyota, and they went with this with the second generation, which is what we'll talk about later, especially the third generation, they wanted efficiency, but they also wanted ease of driving. When you're driving a hybrid, the goal wasn't to build a car that was different from a normal car, that you had to drive differently. In fact, the goal was the exact opposite. Build a car as normal as possible, where you don't even have to think about it. Later, with the third generation, when they found out that people wanted to get more involved in their cars, they thought that it was cool the way that it worked, and they wanted to have more control of their driving experiences, they added power modes, eco mode, power mode, EV mode. Honda did something a little bit different. They knew that a lot of people that wanted economy out of their cars got a manual transmission. Why? Well, because you could choose when it gets to shift. That means you can choose a higher gear. That way the engine is revving lower on the freeway. You can choose how the car drives. So with Honda, with this car, they wanted the people to be more involved in the driving of the car, more involved in the efficiency. So they gave it a manual so that people could decide just how efficient they wanted to be. Now, because they went for 100% efficiency, they led to the most efficient shape ever. Not the egg, that's more for structural things. The teardrop. It's wide at the front and skinny around the bottom, so that air goes around the front, goes into the intercooler, into the radiator, cools all the bits that need to be cooled, and then goes shooting out of the wheel well and back down the side, which meant that it was only a two-seater. There were no seats in the back, but it did have a big, decent amount of trunk space. So without further ado, let's get into the competition between the both of them. Let's look at the specs and see who was really better at efficiency, and then ask the question, which killed the insight. Which do you think you would rather have? And here we go. Now, if you're some kind of nerd, which I'm assuming you are, considering you're watching a probably hour-long video on the Toyota Prius, we have the battery construction and the voltage and everything if you really find that interesting. Then, for the miles per gallon, what it really came down to. If you're going to spend all this extra money on a car, you probably want something that's at least decently fuel efficient. And I will admit the Insight took it, but not in a way that was not great. The only reason why the Insight got better fuel economy than the Toyota Prius was because it was lighter. It wasn't a family sedan, it was a teardrop shape. And certainly, Honda's hybrid system definitely did not have the edge over Toyota's hybrid synergy drive system. Honda's was called IMA, Integrated Motor Assist. We'll talk a little bit about that in the same slide in just a little bit. Now, for the horsepower, technically the Honda had more horsepower than the Toyota Prius, but this is an issue that we're having again today. Would you rather have a 3.6-liter, 6-cylinder Subaru Outback, or a turbocharged 4-cylinder? Now, technically, under some circumstances, the turbocharged 4-cylinder can make more horsepower than the 3.6-liter V6, but you'd probably rather have the V6 because when you're towing, you have the weight behind you. That's the same kind of the issue with the Insight. It had a 3-cylinder engine and a small, tiny 13-horsepower electric assist motor. So the drivetrain was a lot less powerful than the Toyota Prius's drivetrain, but it scored better on tests with horsepower and miles per gallon and top speed, just because simply the fact that the car was light. The car was light, you had a manual, you could drive it the way that you wanted, so it technically, well, Honda's system, if you look at it objectively, was better. It got better miles per gallon, it was slightly more powerful, had a quicker 0 to 60. Toyota's was the more sustainable option. It had a 4-cylinder. It had a more powerful 44 horsepower electric motor. And here's where Honda's hybrid system really does not help the Insight. So, Honda's hybrid system, as we've said before, it had less substance behind it, but the car overall, even if the hybrid system wasn't as good as the hybrid synergy drive system, scored better because it was lighter and stuff like that. Now let's get into the actual design of the hybrid systems, and I'm just going to talk about this just from memory because I did a bunch of research for this video, and I don't care about taking any more screenshots, at least not for this section. So, Toyota's hybrid synergy drive system worked like this. You had 2 electric motors. One of the electric motors would work as an alternator and was strapped directly onto the crankshaft of the engine. It wouldn't help the engine. It wouldn't kick on ever. It would never consume electricity, except for starting the engine. You know, when you're driving through a parking lot, that little motor isn't going to be doing anything. It's just going to be sitting there idling with the engine when the engine is on. It had a second electric motor that would actually drive the car. It was 44 horsepower. It was more powerful, and they were connected via, now they call it an eCVT. It's not an eCVT. What it is a planetary gear system. Now, just look it up. It's very complicated. Essentially, you have 1 gear in the middle, 3 gears around it, or different number of gears depending on how you do it, you know. It depends on how you want to build a transmission, how much helical gears and stuff. It gets really technical. But essentially, either of them could drive independently. You could have the motor driving the car independently, or you could have the engine driving independently, and they could both hold their own pretty decently, except the electric motor was really to be used under 17 miles per hour and couldn't really be in EV mode intentionally. You couldn't force it into EV mode. There was no modes for that yet. It would just choose when to kick on, when not to kick on. Honda's integrated motor assist was that. It was integrated motor assist. There was only one motor, and it was tied to the crankshaft of the engine. But this time, it would drive. So let's say you're driving down a road, you're driving through a parking lot, the engine would be on, and the motor would be, well, assisting the engine. Now, this doesn't mean that the engine was literally always on in the integrated motor assist, just whenever you were driving. There would never be a time that the electric motor was operating, except for acting as an alternator, that the motor would not be on. The only time the engine stopped in the Honda Insight was when the car was completely stopped. It's like a modern car, go brrr, it'd shudder, you'd feel like, this was weird. Imagine driving a manual where the engine constantly feels like it's stalled out at every single stoplight. I never really thought about that before, but that must have been really, really hectic for first-time, manual drivers of the IMA. Anyway, essentially, the engine was always on whenever the car was driving, and that's how it could have a manual. They couldn't drive independently. You didn't need to synergize anything. They were just one unit, and then you attach a transmission onto that. Bing, bang, boom, you're home. But as most people who watch my channel, or car channels in general, know, the best car doesn't always win, and in this case, technically, even though that the Honda Insight was better than the Toyota Prius by metrics alone, it didn't win. Let's get into sales. Okay, this is a table that I made. Well, I found those sources and then Grok threw it all together to make it look all nice and pretty. This is comparing the Toyota Prius's global sales to the Honda Insight's U.S. sales. Now, I had to do it like this for a reason. Good Car, Bad Car Net is a great resource for finding car sales numbers, but since Honda was kind of sad that they spent millions of dollars designing this car and it didn't sell well, they weren't too happy to publish those numbers, so it's a real pain in the ass to find. Now, I do have a table that will look after this of the overall sales of both of the first generations added up from every single year. We'll get to that after this, but let's just assume that these, trust me when you see the tables. The Honda Insight wasn't like a smash hit everywhere else. I can just tell you that. I can tell you that the Prius was beating it even in these charts. Even though this is only the U.S. sales, it didn't make much anywhere else. So yeah, I'm not a master of numbers, but comparing these two numbers, like 15,200 to a grand 17 or 28,100 to a grand 2,000. Now, if you're wondering why 2003 is low, that's because the second generation was introduced that same year, so the first gen didn't get as many sales. So, yeah, I'm not great with numbers, but I would say that the Toyota Prius, just ever so slightly, just by, about 20,000 or so, has the edge over the Honda Insight. So let's look up those sales numbers. Let's see the global sales numbers for the Insight compared to the global sales numbers from the first generation Toyota Prius, first generation Priuses, and first generation Insights. Well, here we are. Now, we have to take these with a grain of salt because I genuinely could not find any records. So, Grok made this table. I looked up the sources that it used, and they seem very legit, and I fact-checked this. There's no facts here that I can't prove came from a reputable source, but again, AI made it, so take it with a grain of salt. I think Grok is pretty good at this stuff, though. I trust Grok. So, let's take the global cumulative sales of the Honda Insight. The only thing that's wrong is, like, the Japan, like, the way that it splits it up. Like, I don't agree with that, according to the sources that I found, but the overall unit numbers seem to be pretty okay. The Honda Insight first generation sold in its first, generation, a grand total of 17,020 units. That's a lot of cars right there. If 17,000 cars were in your driveway right now, I bet your house wouldn't exist anymore. But the Toyota Prius sold 123,000 units. Yeah. I think the Prius won. So I think let's just look at the two cars. The Prius was the safe bet. It was a sedan. It was a family sedan. The Insight was crazy. It was 2 doors, 2-seater, and it just wasn't that popular of a body style. So no wonder the Toyota Prius won the way that it did. So with that, let's move into the second generation Prius where things actually start to get interesting, believe it or not. Alright, now here's the fun part. I have some design sketches, some concepts for the second generation Toyota Prius. Now, the second generation Toyota Prius was designed by Hiroshi Akamoto, and the goal was to get as much of the Prius without affecting that wind resistance, the economy. Now, there were a few main goals for the second generation Toyota Prius. They wanted to take inspiration from the Honda Insight. Essentially, what they wanted to do is make an extremely aerodynamic front end. A front end that would just cut through the wind, use the air when necessary. That would come in later when they have the flaps that open and close for the front grille, but that's still about a decade away. But they want a front end that's extremely efficient, that's able to take in all the air to cool that hybrid system, but also rejects air when it's not needed and shoots it across the body of the car. Now, the teardrop shape is efficient, but what they really want is a lot out of that backside of the car. So they were going to go for a super efficient, super aerodynamic front end and then leave the back of the car as wide as possible for the rear passenger row. They also found out that sedan trunk, when the air would travel over top of the car, it would practically stop at the roof and then shoot off, if you know what I'm talking about aerodynamics. So it would reach the back of the roof where normally it would shoot down and then to the trunk and then out. That's not what happened. It would go up the hood, up the windshield, on the roof, and then just shoot off when going through the highway. That meant that there was an entire categorical space. There's a bunch of space behind the rear window, behind the trunk, that flat trunk, where they could extend the shape out, maybe make it a hatchback, make it a little bit taller, add some more space that would not affect the aerodynamics. So they went ahead. Let's look at some of these images. Now, we're going to do 2 at a time here because they have around 8 images, and look at these. These are some of the original sketches for the second generation Prius, and notice exactly what I just told you. They're utilizing that space behind the rear window, which previously wasn't utilized because it was a sedan, because the way that the aerodynamics worked, it really didn't affect the aerodynamics that much, and making the front of it, the windshield, super far pushed back, the hood just scooping directly onto the windshield and off, because it was the front of the car that they cared about. They didn't have to make it like a teardrop like the inside. All they had had to do was get the air to go around the front of the car in a way that would make sense and that wouldn't cause too much drag when going forward. All it had to do was pick up some air when needed, like we see in this little diamond Toyota logo pattern on the image on the bottom and the two vents at the bottom, or the more Toyota Sienna, just to me, of that generation, looking top image. All it had to do was capture enough air to be useful to the Toyota Hybrid Synergy drive system, and maybe cool the brakes. That one had a brake cooling, at least that's what I'm assuming it's supposed to be, vent near the wheel well there, and then shoot it across the other side of the car to the sides and then up. They also both have air channels. On the side, one is lower towards the kick panel, and one is up near the windows to maximize interior space and capacity, but also make sure that we're utilizing 100% of the footprint of the car. Now, these two played around with a horizontal grille. One of the grills, with the split headlights at the top, would take the air, pass it into two channels, which would go on either side and then later be released into the wheel wells, while the second one went for a straight, completely open bar at the front, sucking in all the air that was needed, and then the rest of it would simply just get shot around the windshield and shot around the sides. Now, again, we see some wheel designs here. These are probably not final wheel designs. In fact, these are probably just the same wheels, but resized to match the thing. You know, wheels was part of it too, and they couldn't really decide, did they want to go more utilitarian, more modern? They want to keep it modern enough where people would feel like it's an e-car, because they found out that people are actually willing to stretch quite a bit with the Prius. They don't want a normal car that's just a hybrid, and trust me, we'll get into that with the next chapter. They had cars that could suit those needs. So the Prius was going 100% weirdo style and doing it the best that it could with what it had. Now, I've grouped these together because I grouped the other ones for the horizontal grills, and the first one were the ones that didn't really quite fit together. Also, I lied, there's only 6, so enjoy these while you have them. These were some other concepts. Notice the 6-spoke wheel design and the little flares, the little nubs on the wheel to break up the air. That will actually be on the actual Prius, but we'll get to the actual second-generation Prius in a minute. Let's appreciate these while we have them. I don't have any sketches of the back of the cars, but again, we have a similar shape. Extremely aerodynamic around the front, wide at the back, and using up all that space that was wasted behind the rear window. You know what I'm saying here. So now that we've analyzed all of these images of what the second generation Prius could look like, let's look at the actual second generation Toyota Prius and point out little bits that we notice. Alright class, what do we notice about the final Prius? Well, first of all, it inherited the vertical headlights that a lot of the concepts have. Second of all, it inherited the vertical grille that a lot of the concepts have. It inherited the 6-spoke wheels that a lot of the concepts had, except instead of going for the little nubs, which for some reason in my brain I thought it had the aero wheel covers, which were just as smooth and flat as possible while still looking like normal wheels. It inherited the rear window shape from the other cars. Notice that windshield. It inherited the same windshield, which was not standard for the time of this car, where the windshield was not the entire length of the front of the car. Because it was shaped in such a round pattern, it wasn't a teardrop around the sides, it was a teardrop around the top, if you know what I'm saying. So it gets thin towards the front, thick, then thin again towards the bottom, and then the air travels under the car. So the windshield did not climb the entire face of the car, if you know what I'm saying. Like, the roof was curved up past the windshield. Meanwhile, in many sedans, the windshield was flat, and then the roof was flat right above the windshield. Instead, the windshield and the roof were kind of one continuous piece that floated over the Prius. Same with the back design. And also, notice the aerodynamics here. We have the wind channel. Again, it inherited the wind channel near the kick of the door, near the top, instead of the top of the door. Now, the reason why they did this, and this is something that I find interesting, in modern cars, you'll find that a lot of times when you stare at like an SUV or something, the hips are really chunky, and yet the actual passenger compartment is really thin. That's something that Toyota was testing with. They decided not to do it. Instead, they used the air channel around the sides of the car. Now, if you just start pretending you're air and pretend like you're knocking into the car, it's a bottom breather. You got that big bottom grill down there. If you don't want to go into the grill, you smack the sides, and you see that little body line that goes straight to the wheel well. Well, you get shot around the wheel well to the aerodynamic wheels, then you get shot into that little loop there in the corner of the doors, and then shot behind the car. This was an extremely aerodynamic vehicle. This design has a drag coefficient of 0.26. It is more aerodynamic than many of the Camrys, the Camry Solara, the Previa minivan, the Sienna, the Jeep Wrangler, the Volkswagen Beetle, the Acura CL, the Ford Mustang, the Volkswagen Corvette, the Chevrolet Corvette C5. It is aerodynamic than lots of other cars on the market simply because of Toyota's intelligent design. Now, the interior was great because of the shape of the car. Now, I'm not trying to glaze the Toyota Prius, but this is a video on the Toyota Prius, so I think I can talk about it. The dashboard design was nearly perfect. First of all, they added a window between where the mirror sits and the windshield to give you maximum visibility. The dashboard curved with that mirror. Also, some customer complaints in the previous generation of Prius said that their infotainment system, their gauge cluster, was kind of airing out their dirty laundry. If they were speeding, everyone in the car could tell that they were speeding because it was mounted in the center. This time, the driver's information cluster was moved to the side on the driver's side rather than everyone being able to view it. Also, the touchscreen on the other car didn't age well. Toyota saw this as a problem, right? It aged kind of okay, but having to use it got worse and worse over the years. Parts would be less available, and touchscreens were a new gamble, so Toyota wanted to make sure they did it right. So this time, the touchscreen was not the radio. It wasn't the radio last time, but it had essentially a radio and an infotainment screen. Now they're all combined, but back then you could put a CD in, you could adjust the volume, you could do everything. You could operate the radio individually from the screen by the radio on the bottom. If you want to install Apple CarPlay or something, it doesn't go through the main screen, it actually goes through that rear stereo. You can actually have two screens in your Prius if you replace it with a modern kit. It had plenty of storage. There was a hidden Kleenex box underneath the armrest. You had a little piano black, I don't really like piano black, but I digress. Piano black storage box underneath the radio. Everything in this car was designed to be useful. And sure, the interior was weird, but people loved it. It also made it easier for left-hand and right-hand drive countries because the dashboard was essentially the same on both sides. They used the same vent assemblies, so if you wanted to switch one from left to right-hand drive, it would be difficult. It's not going to be an easy process, but it was a little bit easier and a little bit less costly than it was on previous generations and previous models because of the symmetry. Because of how symmetrical the dashboard was. Instead of having a center console that was flowing, that would touch all the way up and like on the Camrys and kiss the dashboard, the Prius felt more SUV-y, like the trend of the time. It felt bigger, felt wider, because the center console didn't connect with the dashboard. You could have your armrest, you could set that down, you could have your little cup in there, and you could still take your foot over and put it in the passenger's footwell. A lot of people like that. You could put your bag down there. You had infinite space. It felt like a minivan. You've got this flat floor and a bunch of stuff mounted to it. The back seat was great. The reason why the Prius's shape worked so well is because the peak of the height was over the driver's head. That meant that the driver felt like the biggest. It felt like you're in a fish tank. There's glass all around you. You can see, you feel like you have no blind spots. And for the passengers, because the peak of the roof was over the driver's head, they still got excellent, and I mean excellent headroom as well, because this wasn't a car like the mistake that Honda made later, we'll get to that with 2 chapters on, where they sloped it down too much in the rear and therefore rear passenger headroom was affected. No, they kept the same overall dimensions as the previous sedan, meaning that the rear passengers had a little bit less, but just about as much headroom as the driver. And that wasn't because they took away some headroom, that's because they added headroom to the driver's side. So they got about the same headroom as the driver without having to lower the roof too much to be aerodynamic, a perfect system. And this all-new shape allowed for you to put taller things in your passenger compartment, in the back, in the trunk space. You can fold the seats flat. You can sleep in the back of the thing. It's an extremely modular vehicle, and for the first time ever, this was cool. You could get it with leather. It was its own thing, an army of one. And Toyota got it right. Toyota finally decided that the Prius shouldn't be some niche car. And what they did was they got their marketing and they did it right. First of all, they didn't launch the car as this car. Oh, it's a hybrid, and that means it has 2 electric motors and 1 gas. They didn't do that. What they said was, this car is a movement. This car is about the green movement. We care about our Earth. We love our Earth. They stirred up and instilled emotional values in the customer that made them want to purchase a Toyota Prius to support this movement. Who here among our audience, and again, not for political reasons, who here disagrees with the idea that we should preserve the Earth? Anyone here? Anyone here? Excluding all politics, just the general idea of preserving the Earth. Everyone agrees with that. And what they did was they didn't position this as some sort of weird geek car. They didn't want some guy in the basement who bought this car and, yeah, I like my Prius. They didn't do that. They wanted celebrities. Celebrities who are desperate to show their care for the Earth and social causes that they may or may not actually care about in real life would buy up these Priuses, and that way people would think that they're cool. When you drive a Prius, you're not just driving this Toyota that I got down at the dealership. You're starting a movement. You're with the green movement. And the best part was, a lot of times, this is risky. This is risky business. associating a car with a movement of some kind is good for the people in that movement and the people who support that movement, but for the people that don't, the car becomes a laughingstock. It becomes just like some other cheap crap. But the celebrities and the validation of Hollywood in general, I mean, look at all these people. They even excluded Jennifer Aniston. There were even more celebrities that drove second-generation Toyota Priuses. They were extremely popular. So Toyota got it right. They made it a movement, and they avoided a lot of the cons of that by getting celebrities into Priuses. Now, they didn't do that with the third gen, and the third gen was like the laughingstock of everything. And it didn't help that in 2008, Top Gear released an episode about how bad the Prius was, and about how a Jaguar going around a track like 50 miles an hour gets better gas mileage than a Prius. But I digress. At the beginning in 2004, Prius was going strong. Also, just a side note for people looking to purchase, there was a refresh in 2006, and they changed the dashboard material from a painted material, which would flake away and the paint would come off, to a textured material. Greg, your car angel, thank you for that one. So if you decide to buy a second generation, get one after 2006. Now, after all of this, was the Prius really improved by that much? Kind of a little bit. I mean, not a whole lot. They improved miles per gallon by about 5 to 6 on average. That's good. I mean, 6 miles per gallon is a lot, especially to squeeze out of a car when you haven't changed the powertrain that much. They also added more horsepower to the motor. Instead of being 44 horsepower, it had 67 horsepower now. So bigger motor that could handle things. That also meant that it could drive for up to 1 to 2 miles at very low speeds in short bursts compared to the first generation, which was very limited at 1 mile. And this got 550 to 600 miles of range because it had a bigger fuel tank, making people feel like, a fill-up. People don't think about their fuel tank size. What people think about is when you go there and you fill up your tank, and how long does that last you? You could have the most efficient car on the planet, but if it only had a 1-gallon tank and you were filling it up, you'd say, gosh, gee, this car sucks, I hate this car. So subtly, by improving the size of the gas tank and the efficiency, people thought, even if the car was maybe only 5 miles per gallon more efficient, that it was actually doing more than it really was. And these cars were fantastic for hypermiling. The first generation, it wasn't gimmicky. It wasn't designed to be gimmicky. It beat the Insight. It did everything it had to do. But this Prius, it was designed to be gimmicky. It was designed to be the green car. It was just perfect. They got the marketing right, they got the shape right, they got the design right, they got the powertrain right. Toyota was just hitting it out of the ballpark. And just like every single fantastic generation of the Toyota Prius, it gave Honda the old smackdown. See, in 2002, Honda admitted, you want to know what? The Insight kind of sucks. We blew it. It's not selling well. We can't even reach our 5,000-year goal, and Toyota's smashing it with their Prius. So you want to know what, Toyota? We're going to one-up you. We're going to psy-op you. We're going to make it the Civic hybrid. We're just going to take the Insight and go and just put it all in the Civic, and you want to know, it's a family car. They have to like it. It's a family car. It's why the Prius is selling well. Why isn't it selling? And you want to know it for a second. People thought that they had them. Honda, they just did the same thing. And then in 2003, late 2003, a year later, Toyota goes flying past them with the second generation. So Honda, they thought they were the shit. They were like, we came out with this new generation of Honda Civic Hybrid, and we were just so good. We're winning, and you're losing, and we're great, and we're going to take you down. And then Toyota is one step ahead and just goes flying past them with the second generation. I mean, flying, shooting like a star right past Honda. There it is. We found it. Yeah, not a single year did the Honda Civic Hybrid ever come close to selling the Toyota Prius. In 2004, just 30,000 off, The Civic Hybrid sold better than the Insight, but it was nowhere even close to the Prius. We've covered the entire second generation Prius's history, so now it's time to move on to the original Prius family. Not the C and the V, but the Camry Hybrid and the Highlander Hybrid. In this world, we know a few facts about life, and one of those facts is no one can do every single thing in life alone, and that is true for the Prius too. Before 2006, if you wanted a Toyota hybrid, if you want a hybrid made by Toyota, you absolutely had to get the Toyota Prius. There was no other Toyota hybrids. But the Toyota Prius cannot lead Toyota hybrids for itself. So Toyota wanted to create a Prius family. They didn't want to call it the Prius because that was kind of the problem. The Prius was a one-size-fits-all for about 2 years, and then people started wanting more. They wanted all-wheel drive. They wanted, hybrids that were all-wheel drive. They wanted a hybrid Camry. And what better time to start than in 2006? In 2006, Toyota had a lot of new models. They were coming out with a new Highlander soon. They'd just create a hybrid to shove off to the sides before that one was done baking in the oven. And the new Camry was coming out, so why not make a hybrid of that? And Toyota got to work. The new Toyota hybrid family would, tide everyone over until the full meal comes later with the first actual Toyota Prius family. But this was the first Toyota hybrid family per se. But the original Toyota Prius family sounds better for clickbait, so we'll go with that instead. And what a beautiful family it was. We had a Toyota hybrid for every single person. If you just wanted a Toyota hybrid, if you just wanted a Toyota Prius, that viral car with the weirdness, essentially your average everyday car that you could drive around, the Toyota Prius was perfect. If you just wanted a normal car, you're just a dad, you're taking your kids to soccer practice, you don't want to be a Prius driver, you don't want to be with Hollywood, you don't want to be in the green movement, but, a hybrid sounds kind of good, saves on gas, it's cheaper. Then you have the Toyota Camry hybrid. And if you're a soccer mom, but you're a cool soccer mom, and you want to be efficient, but not lose any of your all-wheel drive or towing capacity, get the Highlander hybrid. It was perfect for a while, but Toyota knew that people wanted too many things out of the Prius. People wanted more space. People wanted less space. They wanted so much out of the Prius, and Toyota just could not cooperate and get all of that and squeeze all of that out of one platform. So they were still thinking up a solution, but for now, the first Toyota Prius family worked. Now, Honda was also doing this, but, it was just... So they came out with the Accord hybrid in 2005. It sold so horribly that they canceled it in 2007, only to be returned again in 2015, like 7 years later. Yeah, they introduced it, no sales, fell on its ass, and so they got rid of it. I would mention the sales numbers, but you already know what happened. The Toyota hybrid family, especially if you add all these up together, they probably blew normal Honda sales out of the water, much less the Honda Accord hybrid, which was so unsuccessful it only lasted 2 years. Give me a break. But maybe that wasn't an intentional blunder. None of them are designed to be intentional blunders. Maybe Honda just had their focus on something else. Maybe they had the insight to try and hit the Toyota Prius where it hurts. Honda finally, for the love of God, figured it out. In the same way that if you're trapped in an underground cave and with your eyes closed and you keep bumping around, eventually you'll find the exit. Honda finally figured it out. Slowpoke Honda finally got off their butts and decided to actually design some cars. And this is a sentence I never thought I'd have to say about Honda's IMA or any Honda hybrid ever up to this point. But it actually wasn't that bad, and this was the first time the Toyota Prius had a somewhat genuine competitor. But Toyota wasn't sitting on their ass either. They had a brand new third generation, but would it be enough to fight off this new Insight? So what did Honda change, and was it really better than the second generation Toyota Prius? Because it launched in January 2009. In January 2009, sure, the third generation of the Prius had been announced, but currently on sale was the second generation. There were some videos comparing them. No, the Prius still got better range, the Prius still had more horsepower, the Prius still had more miles per gallon, it was still more efficient, but the new Insight had a CVT, no more manual. It had the same form factor as the Toyota Prius, and you want to know what? Just in the heat of battle, when Toyota was coming out with the third generation, they decided to do what Toyota does in the heat of battle and shoot themselves as hard as they can in the foot. Now, when I say they shot themselves in the foot, I don't mean that the third generation was bad. The third generation was great. They made a couple choices that really helped cement the third generation Prius as what I believe to be one of the best Toyota Prius generations ever. First of all, the second generation was weird, but this new third generation didn't get the same publicity as the second generation, so they toned it down a little bit. It didn't have to look so didn't have to look so modern, they toned it back. They created an interior which was useful. They kept a lot of the features that people loved. They removed the previous detached console and made the console one big flowing charade of buttons. They made the shifter in an easier place, and they differentiated the Prius for once. Up until this point, the Prius has felt like an enthusiast car. You either get this one or that one. There's no options. You get these wheels or those wheels. Everything was an option. With this new Prius, there were actually trim levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. With 1 and 2 and 3, you had the base model, cloth, you don't get a screen, which was one of the first Toyota Prius, I think the first Toyota Prius models to not come with the screen as default ever. But you paid less. This made the Prius a lot more accessible to people. Now, why would they do that? Think about it. This is 2009. People have just gone through the Great Recession. People are not spending money on cars. They're not spending money on gas. Of course, the Prius would adapt to the times that it's in by getting cheaper and Toyota doing everything they could to lower the price. Of course they would do that. That's what you and I would do if we were CEO of Toyota. The second generation Prius started gaining fame because the 2004s were cheap in 2008, and people really needed cars that were great on gas. Prius was the great solution, and Toyota wasn't going to stop that reputation. Now, the third generation Prius was overall a fantastic Prius. They didn't make a whole lot of changes to the hybrid system. It was a little bit more efficient, but the style was there. The interior was great. I love the interior in this car. I have the dual glove boxes. That's nice. You can put your phone in the top one or whatever, and it's kind of neat to show passengers the trick where you push both buttons at once, and the dashboard opens up. You got the vent that goes from one side to the other. Very stylish. You've got that neat little projection screen there, and this little hybrid Synergy Drive monitor system, which you had on the previous models, but this time it doesn't take up your infotainment screen. It's in your own personal screen in the dashboard. You had your own steering wheel, and for once the Prius felt like a brand. Not just one car, but like an entirely complete brand. But then Toyota decided, as it was marching around with its shotgun on the Toyota campus, there's a snake in my boot, and dag nabbit, they were going to get that snake, so they pulled out that shotgun and fired! Bang! Oil consumption issues. Bang! Piston ring problems. That's right. The 6th generation Toyota Camry, and I made a video on this, had oil consumption and piston ring problems. And for some reason, Toyota thought that would be a great time to add that into the Toyota Prius. But thank the Lord that people didn't find out about that in 2012, 2010, when the war was happening. But also for Toyota, this war, the Toyota Prius in the Insight, was worse than ever. Because for the first time in history, for the first time in forever, people cared about the Insight, and people cared about the Prius, and they made videos online on YouTube, which spread virally. You see, popularity is both a blessing and a curse. Before, the Prius was just some niche car. With the second generation, it blew up, and now the Insight is back at the same time the third generation Prius is back. And you have to remember the timeline here. If this happened in 2024, do you think anyone would care? Do you think there'd be any videos? Maybe 1 or 2 by Toyota Jeff, and that would be it. But back in these days, in 2009, 2010, with the recession, what happened was car companies weren't making cars. GM and Chrysler had just get their asses kicked, and they were walking away with their government handouts. Oh, please, sir, penny for your thoughts. They weren't making any new cars anytime soon. Chrysler was lucky to keep the lights on in their factories. We had Honda over here, who's playing it safe. We had Suzuki, who's just gone now. It was so bad they had to die. We have Mitsubishi, who's restructuring the company and killing off a bunch of models, like the Eclipse Spider and all that crap, so that they can actually survive. But for the first time in forever, car news happened. Toyota and Honda released the same vehicle at the same time, and dagnabbit, they were going to find out which one was better. And they were going to make YouTube videos to tell you which one was better. And so how did that really play out? I bet I had you on the edge of your seat. I bet I did. It's too late. Honda, it's too late. You've just missed season 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're coming back on the finale on season 6. You're gone. Your battle ended like 20 years ago. Why? First of all, the Honda Insight was weird. There wasn't as much room in the Toyota Prius. It was more expensive than the Toyota Prius. It was worse at everything than the Toyota Prius. The third generation got so much coverage. People loved it. It was the best Prius ever. People could actually afford it because it was cheaper than the starting price of the previous Prius. And the Insight was just this thing. Like, people knew what the Prius was. They looked at the Prius and they said, wow, that was great. That's a mighty fine vehicle right there. And they bought it. With the Insight, you look at that. Ew, what is that? Is that a Civic? Is that... Because they just did the whole thing of being like, oh, it's not an Insight, it's a Civic, it's an Accord, it's anything but the Insight. And they're like, it's the Insight. Are you really shocked that people don't know what you're selling? Are you kidding me? We just did this entire thing to get rid of the Insight, and we're like, hey, the Poo 2 is back. It's right back here. And guess what? It didn't matter anyway, because then Toyota came out with the Prius family, and again, blew Honda's old, watery, wimpy butt out of the water, and... alright, let's get into the next section. The Prius family. Here we go. Okay. I need to do this because I don't think I drilled in just how bad the Insight was compared to the Prius. There is not a single item on this list where the Insight is better than the Prius. Look over it. There's not one. The Prius has more cargo room. It's more powerful. It gets more range. It's more fuel efficient. It's the most fuel efficient Prius ever made in history. It gets more range. It's so much better. And you want to, I have to make a correction here. This is an accurate history of the Prius, not a very inaccurate one, okay? The Insight was actually cheaper than the Prius. Before I tell you how much it is, how much would the Insight have to be cheaper than the Toyota Prius for you to accept all of this? The Insight's not bad, but when you compare it to the Toyota Prius, why even make a car anyway? It's like making it's like having a Corolla and then a Corolla with a 3-speed manual. Well, I'll have the Corolla then, not the weird one. I don't want the Poo 2. I want the Prius. Anyway, and this is you're just gonna go, wow, this was crazy. Just a reminder that you could finance this as well, so this isn't gonna break the bank. I could sell probably 2 things on this desk right now, excluding this computer, and make up the difference. $1,000 with dealerships incentives. $1,000. Are you kidding me? Yeah, I'm gonna pay $1,000 less. I'm saving $1,000, which is not a little bit of money. That's a lot of money, but I'm saving $1,000 on like a 21 to $98,900 car, so that I can get a worse car all around in literally every single. I cannot find one way in which the Insight was better than the Prius. So yes, of course the Prius biblically slapped down the Insight. I mean, it was not even close, not even a little bit, not even a fathom of, not even a fraction of a percent was the Insight better. Now that I've absolutely scooped out the insides of the Insight and sent it packing, sent it home, actually the Prius did, let's move on. Yeah, remember the whole Prius Insight battle? Well, by the end of the segment, you won't, and neither did anyone else after Prius went plural. In 2011, Toyota started the campaign Prius Glows Plural. They even had a competition for what multiple Priuses would be called, and the final submission, the winner, was Prii, which is why whenever we were talking about multiple Priuses, you're not talking about Priuses, you're talking about Prii, like octopi. So, Toyota knew that the Prius could only stretch so far. People loved the versatility of the original Prius, and dagnabbit, the 3rd gen was going to uphold that. But one car can only do so much, and people love the Prius name. You know, even though some people may hate it, those people get Camry hybrids and Highlander hybrids. Also, just a quick note, since I'm not going to mention this or talk about it since it's really unimportant, they did update the Camry hybrid and Highlander hybrid in 2010 to match the new 3rd generation Toyota Prius. Just thought you should know, I made a video on it, but nothing important. Anyway, the weird thing is, in 2011, when they created this campaign, they didn't know what the Prius C was going to look like. The best thing they had to offer was this Prius C concept that looked nothing like the original Prius C. And they never even had a Prius V concept. Like, we don't have any drawings, or at least I can't find any, from the creating of the Prius family. But, of course, we have the Prius C prototype, because that was masqueraded around everywhere for the Prius Goes Plural campaign. Yeah. So, they knew they wanted 4 cars. The regular Prius, of course, obvi. The Prius plug-in, that was going to have a bigger battery. You're going to be able to plug it in. You'd be able to drive further on EV alone. It was going to be more powerful than the regular Prius and just offer more hybrid, more hybridness. You'd have the Prius V, which it was called the Prius Plus, and the Prius something else. I think it was the Prius Plus in Europe and Australia and Japan. In those other markets, it would have a lithium-ion battery instead of the nickel-metal, but here in the United States, they cheaped out, gave us the nickel-metal battery, and we only got 2 rows of seats because the battery was bigger because, well, it held energy better than the lithium-ion, so needed more space. And the Prius C, the fun, sporty, small Prius. Without further ado, let's reveal them, let's deal them, show the Prius family, show them to us. So just to start off, before we go more in depth, let's do an overview of all the models. First, we have the 2012 regular Toyota Prius. Then we have the Toyota Prius plug-in hybrid, which had a bigger battery pack, and you could plug it in and get, I think it was 14 miles of range, but we'll get more into that when we talk about them individually. The Prius C, which was your fun, happy-go-lucky Prius, which still had a 4-cylinder, even though it was about the size of a Mitsubishi Mirage, which means it was pretty quick. I mean, it wasn't fast, but it was decently quick, considering it had a proportionally large powertrain considering the size of the car, and the Prius V. Now, a fun fact about the Prius V is that in other countries, it had a lithium-ion battery. Now, in the United States, we got the nickel-metal batteries. Why? Because it gets cold over here. In Britain and Australia, it doesn't really get that cold. So lithium-ion batteries are fine for that. But when it comes to being cold, nickel metal batteries, which were the construction of batteries that they were using before, perform better in cold temperatures. But the issue is nickel metal is less efficient than lithium ion, so the batteries have to be bigger, which meant that here in the United States, you could never get a Prius V with a third row. Meanwhile, in other countries, they were sold as the Prius Plus. That's how the Prius V was sold, and they did, in fact, have a third row. So if you've ever wondered why it didn't have a third row, that's why. Now, let's take a look at the regular 2012 Toyota Prius. Alright, well, here we have a nice chart telling you everything you should ever be able to know about the Toyota Prius C. Now, I'm going to make a little note here. For all the Priuses that we're going to talk about, except for the regular Prius and the Prius plug-in, they will all stay the same. So these specifications for the first generation Toyota Prius C will be the same for every single facelift, same with the Prius V, so I'm not going to include them again. So keep your eye out if you're planning to get like an updated model, or if you're watching this video as a buyer's guide. These will be the specifications for any Toyota Aqua, which is what it's called in foreign markets, or Prius C that you will ever be able to find. Now, this was the runt of the family, but not really. This was actually the most efficient car you could buy that was not a plug-in at the time, especially being a compact car, having somewhat a normal Toyota system with a smaller engine, given 1.5 liter Atkinson cycle. Got a smaller engine, but other than that, it walked away pretty good from being the smallest Prius. It also had quite the collection of colors, which I appreciate, and it's always been kind of a dream of mine, like if I have a lot of money, just to buy my 5 favorite colors. They also made a yellow. I'd like to snatch that one up too. But overall, it was a pretty nice car. You could even get it with leather in like the limited trim levels, but I personally would have the base trim level just because I appreciate the hubcaps. So, without further ado, let's move on to the next member of the all-new Prius family. We're not going to cover the third generation Prius because, well, we already did in the previous section. So, let's move on. I lied. This is editing Quokka here. I also really wanted to tell you that this car actually had 2 more horsepower than the 2010 Honda Insight, so that should put into mind just how slow that Insight was. Now, we're moving on. Now, I'd like you to meet the Toyota Prius V. Now, a lot of people online will tell you that the Prius V was on the Camry platform. That's not true. This was just a regular Toyota Prius. Remember when I mentioned that cool thing that the Toyota engineers figured out, that once the air in the aerodynamics goes up the windshield and up the roof, it just goes straight past the car and doesn't shoot back down to fill that gap? Because a little bit of it does, but it doesn't affect it enough to justify not using up that space. Well, that's just what they did here. They simply just clicked and dragged the roofline of the Toyota Prius and dragged it up. It's built on the same platform as the Toyota Prius, has the exact, zero differences. Same engine, same motor, same everything as the regular Toyota Prius. It just gets a little bit worse miles per gallon because it's a little bit heavier, and it only had 2 rows here in the States. I already mentioned that, lithium ion and such. It also came in colors that weren't quite as interesting as the regular Toyota Prius, but aside from everything about it, this was genuinely just a regular Toyota Prius with an ass slapped on it. I also wanted to mention this because I forgot to mention it in the Prius C bit, but the Prius C was actually based on the Yaris, so it is the only Prius out of the Prius family that is not actually just a Prius underneath. Now moving on to the Prius plug-in hybrid. And now on to the Toyota Prius plug-in hybrid. Now, if you can't tell that this is on the regular Toyota Prius platform, you have some problems. Now, this is probably the most interesting of the Toyota Prius family. The only thing that they really did was give it a bigger battery, and that was pretty much it. They also gave it a charging port, but aside from that, it's just a regular Prius, but beefy. Now, the only issue that I would see with this that doesn't really make it, like, fantastic is that it doesn't have a spare tire in the back and you get less cargo space because of that bigger battery. Other than that, not many compromises were made for the plug-in hybrid system. It's literally just a Toyota Prius with a much bigger battery and a means to charge the battery. That is literally all the differences mechanically between this and the regular Toyota Prius. And again, I say this is the most mechanically interesting because it's got a different battery, same motor, same engine, same everything. The Toyota Prius had smaller everything, 1.5 liter engine instead of a 1.8 liter engine, but the Prius V was just the regular Prius, and the Prius C kind of was too in its own little weird way. Now, they did make some changes on the outside, which we'll talk about later when we give the grand overview. We just take a grand look at everything. But overall, I actually prefer the regular Prius over this. They gave it a lot of chrome. In the interior, they replaced the vent that went all the way across the dashboard, which is my favorite feature on my car, with this little grayed-out silver plastic piece that says plug-in hybrid. And I don't like the wheels. And there's just a few things that, I don't really vibe with, like the silver chrome door handles. But other than that, this was a fantastic car, and nearly everyone who's had them says they're fantastic vehicles, and the 13 miles is actually quite a lot. And since the battery is bigger, the motor is big enough where you can actually drive on the highway with this thing and it'll cruise. I mean, my Prius will cruise, but I can't get up to speed. I need the engine for that. This guy does not. It's got a bigger battery, puts out more power, the motor can work harder. Perfect system. overall, the Prius family was pretty good. Now, we're going to look at sales for a minute, but let's just look at the designs on the outside. Now, a couple things I noticed that you may not have noticed. First of all, look at the side-mounted fog light and turn signals. It's in the same location in all of them. The turn signal is always at the top. The fog light is always in the bottom. Notice how the Prius plug-in hybrid got the fog lights from the Toyota Prius V, and how the Toyota Prius V borrowed its fog lights from the original 2010 third-generation Prius. You know, just a few little key differences in the Prius that I kind of appreciate. I also appreciate how the Toyota Prius V is kind of like a throwback model, in that if you look at its grille, it's in the V-shape, the original V-shape that the second-generation Toyota Prius was in, with the emblem above that. So it's just kind of a nice little throwback, and each of them has their own distinct style that makes them feel different enough from the regular Prius, but design elements that end up tying it all back together in a pretty little bow. Alright, now here's where we get a little beware sign. I don't know if you can tell or if you've done this on the internet, but it's really hard to find sales numbers on the internet. And the issue isn't always that you can't find them, the issue is that you find conflicting results. So again, I made a table of my own, and then I had Grok fill in the bits that I couldn't find. So wherever you see approximate is where I couldn't find a definite sales number, or where I found conflicting sales numbers. So take those with a grain of salt, it's somewhere in the range of that. So let's look at the sales, and let's do a little bit of analysis here. The regular Prius was the value leader. They always knew that was going to happen, and we'll talk about what Toyota thought was going to happen in a while. Let's look at what actually happened. So for the first year that the Prius family launched, the Prius plug-in hybrid was last. Prius C was second to last. You know, a small car, expensive, compared to the Yaris. Like, the people who were buying the C probably had enough money to bump up to the regular Prius, so why would they get the smaller, shittier one when they could afford the bigger, nicer one? Or at least what they thought was bigger and nicer. Or spend not the money at all for the Prius C and just go for the Yaris, which was extremely cheaper and had the same specs, well, at least similar specs aside from the economy, as the Prius C. The Prius V was the second leader with 40,000 sales, which was pretty good. And then the regular Toyota Prius was the leader with somewhere between 186,000 to 200,000 sales. I mean, that's pretty good. Then, as we can tell as the years go on, the Prius plug-in hybrid starts to fizzle out. In 2015, you can take that with a grain of salt, because that's when they launched the all-new, fourth generation Toyota Prius plug-in, so they were being sold at the same time, so that explains that dip in numbers, and we can see that the Prius C eventually overtook the V in sales a year later. Now, let's talk about what Toyota wanted to happen. Well, Toyota, for the Toyota Prius V, which is the only source that I could find for these, like, the C, nothing on what Toyota expected to happen, and the plug-in, nothing on what Toyota expected to happen. It's just the V. Toyota expected the Prius V wagon overall, in the year of 2012, to reach an entirety of global sales of 300,000 units. No, I'm joking. 30,000 units. And it exceeded that by 10,000 units. That's what I love about Toyota. There are so many other companies out there, car companies specifically, which will launch a super niche product and then say, oh, well, we gave it to you and you didn't buy it. Well, you have to take everything the consumer says with a grain of salt. You can't expect everyone to come out of the woodwork and buy this car just because someone asked for it and you decided to make it. And Toyota understood that. They weren't expecting the Prius V to have everyone running out of Wall Street. I need to get my Prius V. Wall Street, you know what I mean? Like, they expected this to be a niche car, and over time, the Prius V eventually fell into those sales numbers. Now, we can see that the sales numbers started falling for the Prius V. Now, it would eventually receive an update in 2015, and all would be rectified there. The Prius C was strong in sales always, and the Prius plug-in hybrid would eventually get replaced with the Prime. Now, let's move on. Well, Prius has a problem. Nobody knows what its purpose is. What is a Prius? And another problem of the Prius is that Toyota's already kind of replaced it. This is Toyota's hybrid lineup in 2015, and I'm including the 2016 RAV4 hybrid because it was already on sale mid-2015 as of 2016. So we're looking at the year, not model year. That's an important distinction. Name me a single use case that Toyota's hybrid model without the regular Prius doesn't cover. If you want something light and economical, you get a Prius C. If you just want your average hybrid, you get the Camry hybrid. If you want a little bit more space in the back, but you don't need that much space in the back, then you get the Prius V. If you need something with all-wheel drive that's more like a family solution, then you get the Highlander. If you just need something with all-wheel drive, you get the RAV4 hybrid. And if you want something a little bit more luxurious, you get the Avalon hybrid. There's not a use case for the Prius here. There's not even an iota of an argument for the Prius. What possible niche could the Prius fill that none of these cars do already? Listen, the third generation Prius was the best Prius generation, or at least one of the best Prius generations, in my opinion. It fought off the Insight, it beat Honda into submission, and every single Honda hybrid they launched after that, the CR-Z, they brought back the Civic hybrid, the Insight 2, it beat off every single Honda hybrid, and it was the reigning champion. Now, it doesn't really fit in. We're forgetting the reason for the season. The car that started Toyota Hybrid, the entire idea of a Toyota Hybrid in the first place, is left out in Toyota's modern lineup. Even the Prius C, its only family members, even the Prius's own family has turned against it. The Prius C has received a nip and tuck, and it's got a sportier front end. You know, it's sportier. It doesn't need the Prius name to sell anymore. It's a hybrid, sporty sports car for sporty people who like sporty things. The Prius V has received some eyeliner. And it cried a little bit, but that's okay. It's just sad to see Prius not doing so well. It gets hurt when its parent is suffering. And, I mean, where does the third gen fit into this lineup? So Toyota needs to make a statement. They finally need to make a Prius that actually fits in with the lineup and makes people want to buy a Prius again. You know, now, again, this is what I love about Toyota, and why Toyota will always be my favorite brand no matter what they do. It's because they get it the same way that I get it. They don't look at declining Prius sales numbers and assume, oh, well, this model doesn't work. Every single time we release a new one, the sales numbers jump and then they fall again. They understand that that's just part of making an automobile, and that what they need to not do is kill off the Prius and just leave the C and the V because they're selling good. And the Prius was still selling better than the C and the V, but I mean, compared to the Camry hybrid, I don't know about that. So Toyota needed a new Prius that would redefine what Prius meant. I was born in 2005, so by the time that the third generation Prius was on its way out, I was 10 years old. Now, I may not remember much about the fourth generation Prius. This is about when I started getting into cars, but I do remember one thing. This Super Bowl advertisement. The Prius wasn't just a car anymore that didn't fit in with Toyota's lineup. Wait for the reveal. And there she is, the brand new shining Prius. It's been redefined. It's modern. There's a Prius V hiding around in the background there, and it's an older Prius V, so kudos to them for not using the updated model. There's a Camry, possibly a Camry hybrid right next to them. The Prius was finally being redefined. It was becoming the car that Toyota needed it to be, and that the Prius family needed it to be to finally have some brand identity. It was just great, seeing the Prius all adorned and decked out in a way that it hadn't been in a very long time. This was a weird Prius again, and a weird Prius is a good Prius. Overall, I think that the new fourth generation Toyota Prius was a step up from the third generation, but both generations are good in their own respect. First of all, the new fourth generation made a lot of improvements compared to the previous generation. Now, while it may have been a little bit slower than the previous generation, it had the same 0 to 60, despite having less horsepower. It was lighter. It also used new lithium-ion batteries, as opposed to the old nickel-metal batteries of the third generation. This jump in battery quality led to higher miles per gallon. And the thing that I love about the fourth generation Toyota Prius is that it revolutionized the way the Prius looks, the way that people thought about the Prius. You know, back when the Prius first came out with the second and third generations, people looked at that and they thought that it was a technological marvel because not really of the way that it looked, even though it was a modern shape, even though that shape just turned out to be, as we've seen, invented purely by just happenstance, by just getting the most out of the platform that they got, but also because of the way that it looked in the technology on the inside. Now, hybrids weren't anything special. You could get a hybrid Camry, you could get a hybrid Yaris. I mean, you couldn't, but you could get a hybrid, technically any car that you wanted nowadays, from some manufacturer somewhere. Hybrid technology wasn't the selling point anymore. It was the design, and I think that Toyota really nailed it. The fourth generation was an overall improvement over the third generation, and on the outside, they managed to add new looks without decreasing the efficiency of the Prius. It's essentially just a third generation Prius restyled and with some new technology. It's not just purely a style package or some sort of new trim level or facelift. Now here's a little fun fact that I'm going to add in about the other generations. Every single generation of Prius brought something new to the table for the most part, except for the last generation, the fifth generation, which just turned out to bring bad to the table. But we'll get to that when that segment happens. So, you had the first generation Toyota Prius, which brought you the hybrid technology. The second generation Toyota Prius brought you the shape and the weirdness. The third generation Toyota Prius brought you the solar roof that could run the air conditioning, not the AC, but turn the fans on with a little key fob outside of the car. I have that on my car. I never use it, but if I did use it, it'd be nice on hot days. And the fourth generation brought us the active grille shutter. The shutter would open and close, depending on whether the car needed air or not. Now, if you're like me, you may think, why would a car ever not want air? Isn't it useful for cooling? Well, think about this. When you're on a cold winter's day, it helps warm up the engine faster. A warmer engine equals more efficiency. Let's say it doesn't really need the air. You're operating on motor only. Well, having a bunch of air tumbling around in the engine bay isn't really efficient, so it just scoops it off to the side and allows the car to be more aerodynamic. Overall, it's a really neat feature, and you may think that this is just some feature that's going to go wrong, and there are errors that happen a lot of times for the active grille shutter on these models and later 4th generations of Priuses, which again, we'll talk about later. But it's not as common as you may think, and there was also errors with every other edition. The hybrid system had problems, the shape had its own issues, the 3rd gen cooling system, it could crack under heat and stuff. They all had their own issues, but overall I think this was a pretty neat addition to the Prius family. Now it's time to talk about the interior. In a 3rd generation Prius, the interior was very practical and it had a lot of design languages and design styles that I liked. It was very minimalist and yet it was functional. It had 2 glove boxes that could open, one at the top, one at the bottom on the passenger side. That was nice for storing gloves. You had a glove compartment and a bigger compartment around the bottom for you to store your keys or whatever you felt like storing. You also had that big vent, you can see it on the top there, that went all the way across the dashboard. I thought that was neat. And a little nice integration of different types of plastics. Soft touch and not soft touch on the dashboard. You know, you've got the hard plastic coming together in 2 different colors, and then the soft touch plastic on the doors that meets together with the same color. That's pretty nice. The 4th generation Prius interior was weird. Toyota wanted to go for a theme of it's a Prius first and a Toyota second, and that really didn't end up working out so well. But first, let's talk about the good. The screens. Instead of having one projection, I don't know how to describe it, projection LED screen and one, LED screen, what do you call it? It's not OLED, it's not LCD. In one small little green multicolor LCD screen, you got 2 full color LCD screens. Now, the bad about having that is that even though it was kind of nice to have 2 screens like that at the top, and I'm talking about that little bar up there since the gauge cluster is in the middle, that was nice to have. It could show you a lot more information than the standard Prius, and it was nice to have an extra screen even though it could only show you what the normal part that wasn't digitized on the 3rd gen would show you, and that's just like your speed and the temperature and stuff. But the downside is it wasn't OLED, so when it gets night, like, you know when you have gauges and you can turn the gauge color down? With screens, that's a lot more difficult, because unless they're OLED, all pixels are on all the time, and it can be a little bit bright and a little bit fatiguing during nighttime driving to be staring at a screen. But I have the same gripe with digital gauge clusters that are not OLED too. More bad, the plastic interior bits. They try to do like a combination of piano black and just disgusting white. I don't know how to describe it, like Metro Health, like just health company white, and it just didn't work. They also blocked out the area underneath the steering wheel. This is a gripe of mine, and this is something to look out for when buying a car. Look at the steering wheel on my Prius. Sorry, the 3rd generation Prius. I can put my hand down there while I'm driving and cruise on the highway with one hand at the bottom of the steering wheel. No one drives at 10 and 2, you know. After you've taken, your driver exam and you turn 18 and there's not so many strict laws, you can just relax a little bit and you learn to relax in your driving style, and that makes you a better driver. You want to be alert, but you don't want to be like, gas, brake. You just want to glide with the flow of traffic. In the new Prius, the 4th generation, they blocked out that area down there so you can't put your hand down there. And they blocked it out not with something cool looking, but with a gigantic, ugly, hideous piece of gigantic plastic. I really don't know what they were thinking. And also, the 3rd generation Prius did a good job of blending trim levels. For the lower trim levels, it looked fine. For the nicer trim levels, it looked fine. For the 4th generation, no. The cloth seats looked really out of place. They had a moonstone, which was like 2-tone, and it didn't really work out well with the I'm like rapping here, which didn't really work out well with the overall style of the interior. Now, yeah, overall, the 4th generation was pretty good. I mean, it was fine. Not a whole lot to write home about, but it was fine, I guess. But as we've learned on this channel, nothing matters unless it works. So let's take a look at them sales numbers. No, it didn't work. It really did not work. So in 2016, things were looking pretty good. The first year of the 3rd generation Toyota Prius sales, it matched about the same, aside from about 3,000 units. That's to be expected. It's the first generation of a car. Not many people are going to buy it. They've got to dip their feet in the water. They've got to dip their toes in. Plus, the 3rd generation looked old. This new one looked young, so it's kind of surprising that it had the same problem, but that's okay. Then in 2011, sales numbers declined a little bit to about the same exact rate as it was at the first model year of the 4th gen, so that's pretty good. That just shows that the 4th gen is not going to be as good as the seller as the 3rd gen, but it's still okay. And then in 2012, when the 3rd generation got an update, it soared. But no, for the 4th generation, even though it did get an update, 87,590, That's bad. That's horrible. And then for 2013, the third gen was just rocketing along. Not as high as last year, but the second highest, the third gen, the sales it would ever get. And then for the fourth year of the fourth gen there, 69,718. Yeah, not great. So overall, did it work? No, not really. Or at least not very well. Or not in the way that they were intending, I hope. Oh yeah, remember the Prius plug-in hybrid? Well, there's a new Prius Prime, and it is actually pretty decent. They gave it about twice the size of the battery pack, which was nice. You got 22 miles instead of 11, but it took 5.5 hours to charge instead of the previous 3 miles. But you get 120 mpge compared to the previous model, which only got 95 mpge. They call it mpge because that's when it's charged. It can operate like a normal hybrid. You do not have to charge it. Anyway, let's look at them sales numbers briefly, though. And did it work? Yes, but I'm still not a fan of the original Prius Prime because Toyota, they found that snake and they shot themselves in the foot again to finally finish that snake off. It only had 4 seats for some reason, and if you ask them, they have no reason. So it's like, why though? There's no battery under that. They just decided, oh, well, 4 sounds better than 5. Really, look it up. There's no straight answer. Oh, well, we thought this would be a good idea. Why? I mean, why? But let's step back for a minute. You're telling me that the regular Toyota Prius is having a hard time selling. Now, these are United States numbers, but we can just assume it was worldwide, too. And I know people are going to say, no, you can't assume that. Yes, you can. I've looked at the sales numbers, but it wasn't enough to make a full table. So, U.S. sales numbers are reported a lot better because I don't know why, but they just are. So, if the regular Prius is having a hard time selling, I wonder how the C and V are doing. Now here's where the timeline gets a little bit wishy-washy. Now we've just introduced 3 other cars that I have to keep track of on top of the one that we were already covering, so here's where the timeline gets a little bit weird. We've been going in chronological order, but now we're about to skip ahead and then jump back. So we've just skipped 2 years, but the events that I'm talking about technically take place in 4 years. You'll see what I'm talking about, and then we'll jump back to 2018. So we're moving to 2018 to 2019 now, and then we're going to jump back to 2018. So let's see what the family's been up to, because we've just covered the Prius, but let's see what the family's doing. Well, first, let's cover the changes that were made to each of them. The Prius 3 got 2 extra, facelifts, some nips and tucks, and the Prius V was only allowed 1 facelift before it was put out to pasture. So for the Prius C in 2015, they decided that they wanted to stretch out the front a little bit and make it look a little bit sporty. In 2015, the Prius family wasn't really working too much. Next year, they'd get a brand new Prius, and they just wanted to make sure that they could hold their own. So they needed to find their own niches. So what they did was they made the Prius C in 2015 sporty, and then in the same year, they refreshed the Prius V, and they made that one look like it's crying. I don't know. I don't really know how to describe the changes that they make to the Prius V. They just made it a little bit more dramatic. Now, they did make slight interior changes, but I'm not going to show you photos of those because I've already used up like a terabyte of images on this one video. Okay, give me a break. It's like an hour long. I bet you wouldn't want to edit in those photos. Yeah, all they did was essentially change the steering wheel to have black plastic instead of silver plastic where the silver plastic was, and they changed the layout of the buttons on the steering wheel, and on the Prius V they added a more modern touchscreen and brought it down to 2 vents instead of 3, and then they updated the little driver's screen to be digital instead of analog like it was before. So many changes. And then in 2018, Toyota really must have liked the C because when they killed off the V, they decided to give the C a second chance and rebooted it as an SUV-adjacent thing. I don't really know how to describe it. It's essentially just the regular Toyota Prius like the first generation, but a little bit more moody and a little bit more off-roady, plastic-claddy-y. I don't know. That's how I would describe it. Now, the Prius C was canceled in 2018, and the Prius V was canceled in 2017. Alright, well, the Prius C started off strong in 2012 with 35,000 sales units, which was about what Toyota was expecting. 2013 sales rose. 2014 sales rose again, but Toyota really, that snake, it was still in that boot. They need to shoot themselves in the foot again. So they took a perfectly good automobile, which was selling perfectly fine, and updated it to make it look sporty. This killed the Prius C. The Prius C was already hanging on by the end of 2014, with sales numbers, it was fine. It was in the middle. Its worst year was its first year. That's usually a pretty good sign of good indicator of sales. But for some reason, Toyota was paranoid, hearing noises in the walls, and they decided that they should update it for some ungodly reason. So they updated the thing at 38,000. That's kind of okay. 20,000, terrible. 2017, 12,000. Now here's where we guesstimate. I couldn't find anything for 2018 and nothing for 2019. I had Grok, because Grok puts together all the tables. Since I do a lot of research, I don't keep track of it myself, so I just tell Grok all of it, and then I remember it in my head, so I remember that it's accurate and that it's putting down actually what I told it, not just hallucinating and making up crap. It made up like the 5,000 to 10,000-ish. I just couldn't find any numbers after 2018, probably because Toyota was ashamed that they killed the Prius with their stupidity again. For the V, sold pretty well the first year, 10,000 over expecting, then 4,000 over what they expected, then, declining sales numbers. Then in 2015, they decided to update it, and 28,000, 14,000, 8,000, 9,000. Sales weren't horrible. I mean, 9,000 of anything is good, but in terms of the auto industry, that's not good, and I don't, So, did the Prius family die out unnaturally? Did Toyota just say, we're just going to kill this for fun? No, the sales weren't good, and they finally decided to put it out to pasture. So that's what happened to the Toyota Prius family. Okay, well, spoiler alert, I just can't help myself. I kept thinking in my head about how this is a complete version of the Toyota Prius's history, and not just Quokka's version, like Taylor's version. This isn't Scooter's version, okay? We're telling this the completely inaccurate way. So here is the interiors in 2012 when they started, and the interiors of the 2017 Toyota Prius V, and the 2019 Toyota Prius C. There we go. Okay, I feel better now. Also, yes, I get it. I'm complaining and griping about having to edit a video I chose to make. I get the foolishness of that, and so now, in a much better mood, we will move on. Okay, so the Prius family's dead. It's dead, it's gone, it's been a while since we've had it. So now it's time to move on. The Prius is matured now. The fourth generation was just bad, and this could be the end of the Prius. The family's dead. The regular Prius is essentially dead because the redesign was good and the Prius Prime held its own, but the regular Prius not selling as much as it used to. In fact, the Prime nearly outsold it, so Toyota needed to do something, and they needed to do something fast. And they created a refresh in 2018 that was going to knock your socks off. Now let's talk about the 2019, technically 2018 sold as a 2019 model year. So if we're going by year, it was 2018. If we're going by model year, again, important differentiation, it was 2019 Toyota Prius Attitude Adjustment. Now, I hope you enjoy looking at the channel colors here, but they're going to go away because I have some Brole. Alright, well, essentially what they did was they took the 2016 Toyota Prius, they took everything, kept it in the same spaces, but reorganized it just a little bit. Essentially, the only changes that they made to this car were changes that they could make where the wire would still reach to the new location of wherever it was. So they added fog lights to the areas where the fog lights used to be plugged in. Essentially, all they did was change the front and the back of the wheels to make it look a little bit less crazy. Now, they also added all-wheel drive. Now, it's not true all-wheel drive. It's all-wheel drive E, because I drive a 2015 Toyota RAV4, contrary to popular belief that I'm, a 11-year-old toddler, which I'm not. I actually do drive. I just have a weirdly sounding high-pitched voice. Anyway, that car has a physical connection between the engine and the front wheels and the rear wheels. This does not. It just has another traction motor that sits at the back of the car that spins the rear wheels when needed. So there's no physical connection between the front of the car to the back of the car. And yes, you're right. That means there is in fact 3 motors. Now, I'm not going to do a whole lot on this, and I'm not going to tell you about the changes because essentially there are none. The only changes with all-wheel drive, if you're using that all-wheel drive system, you lose about 2 miles per gallon. There's also something interesting. Toyota Jeff made a great review of the trim levels because this is the first time they changed the trim levels. Now, in 2010, they introduced the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 system. Like the Toyota Prius C was the cheaper model, so it went 1, 2, 3, 4. That meant that you couldn't get the 5, you couldn't get the premium because the Prius C was designed to be cheap. For the Toyota Prius V, which was the big one, you could only get 2, 3, 4, and 5 because it was a luxury car, the luxurious Prius. You want to be on the higher end of things because it's a little bit bigger, and then for the regular Prius, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then they cut out the 1 and then the 5 eventually, even though the 4 was where you wanted it. It was a weird naming system. But finally, as Toyota Jeff said it, Toyota threw us a bone and finally switched to the normal naming scheme. So you have LE, XLE, XSE, no XSE yet, but, SE Nightshade. There was weird trim levels. They also had LE Eco, but one important distinction is that it was all lithium-ion now, all of it, except for the all-wheel drive versions, which switched back to nickel metal because it performed better in cold climates. But other than that, that's literally the only change they made to this model. It's just physical changes on the outside, which you have been enjoying a nice candy apple blue, version of that for the past couple minutes or so. So we get to move on. Yay! Listen, now when I first heard that they were redesigning the Prius, I was jumping up and down with glee because I was into cars at this point. It was about 2022, 2020, and I knew that the Toyota Prius wasn't selling like anything. It was not selling well at all. Now, the refresh and the all-wheel drive helped, but it can only help so much. And I was so glad that Toyota didn't decide to be ignorant. They decided to bring the Prius back and to try and update it to fit their lineup and to be fruitful. And at first, it looked good. But little did I know, it was the devil in disguise. But first, let me tell you about why I really hate the 5th generation Toyota Prius. And that's because I would argue that this car is not a Toyota Prius. First of all, and this is the thing that annoys me the most, they lowered the roofline, and not only did they lower the roofline, but they made the door sills wider and made the rear window smaller and moved the door handle to the back of the rear window. That is stupid. First of all, less headroom in the driver's seat. Everyone is complaining in the new Toyota Prius about how the driver's seat feels really cramped, and that's because you have smaller windows, bigger, chunkier blind spots, and a lower roof. Why? We figured out the design back in 2002 and officially launched for sale in 2003. We figured this out in the thousands, and now we're switching back to something that's obviously not working. It also has gigantic wheels as standard, which reviewers hate because the car drives like crap because big wheels transfer all the vibration from the ground to the inside of the car with stupid low-profile tires, which are horrible. I hate low-profile tires. It is the easiest way to make your car ride worse, and when manufacturers do it, it's the dumbest thing they could do. It's like Serta making a demo mattress, separate from the regular mattress, and filling it with rocks. Why would you want to do that? Why? It's like self-sabotage. So that's stupid. Second of all, it's not even a Prius. Look at the shape of the back of it. It's not as tall, and here's the thing that really ticks me off. A lot of people complained about the rear window on the Prius and the split rear window. I can tell you from driving it, you learn to tune that out. I own 5 cars. It just happened. I have a bunch of shit cars. A bunch of old, tired cars. That's like what I collect. I have a Venza. Anyway. Well, I also have a bigger household now. But you learn to tune that spot out. When you look back at your rear view mirror, you tune that spot out and you fill it in your head, like how you have blind spots in your eyes that you won't always notice. You learn to do that. So it wasn't like some be-all, end-all, Prius-ending thing. It was fine. People thought it was fine. I thought it was fine. And they removed it. And not only did they remove it, but they did not lower the back of the Prius enough to justify there not being a rear window there. Why? So what does this mean? Essentially, let me just say it out for you. What this means is that you have a smaller rear window. That's right. Look at the height difference on the bottom picture. They did not lower it enough to justify removing the second rear window. That's not gone anymore. So not only do you not have a split window, you have no split window at all, and you just have the top part. That is beautiful. I love that. Thank you, Toyota, so much. Also, another thing is the rear wiper. There is no more rear wiper on the rear window. You cannot get one. Not in the United States, not in foreign countries where the Prius is gone. You can't get one. Do you know how much that takes me off? My favorite thing about having my Prius is that rear wiper, because every other sedan, every other cockamamie stupid sedan driving around on the road has their window covered with snow. And meanwhile, in Florida with a light dusting, or up here in Ohio with a not so light dusting, I can just turn it on and I don't have to get out of the car and clean it if it's just a light dusting. Now I have to walk out of the car, get my stupid brush out, and I can't see shit out of the back. Thank you, Toyota, and then they all clapped. And also, this thing shares a platform with the Corolla. Usually that'd be fine, except for the fact that this thing is just a Corolla. It is closer to a Corolla than the previous generation Toyota Prius. Now, where do I get that from? I don't know. I made it up. But I truly believe that. I truly think, and Toyota will never admit this, that underneath this slimy, disgusting car that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, that all it is under there is a Corolla screaming and crying to be let out. It's got the same dimensions as a Corolla. That's probably why it doesn't have the rear window, because it's just got a normal trunk, like a normal Corolla, with a glass hatch added onto it. I mean, I just hate this. It's just not a Prius. It is not a Prius. It doesn't have the rear wiper like a Prius. It doesn't have the split rear window like a Prius. It doesn't have the distinctive shape like a Prius anymore. I mean, there's so many things that a Prius had that this doesn't. It doesn't even have the center-mounted gauge cluster that the Prius had. This is just not a Prius. It's just a Corolla Sport. I don't know. Okay, now let's talk about specs. So now you know why I hate it. Let's talk about specs and try and cheer me up a little bit. Alright, so let's talk about specs. Technically speaking, this Prius is technically the best Prius ever, but I cannot say enough. Technically, it has the most range. Technically, the plug-in hybrid is the best. You know, technically it's the fastest Prius too, but I just can't get over the do's and don'ts of owning a Prius and the similarities that this thing shares with the Corolla. I'm sorry, I just will never, that is something I will never be able to get over with. The loss of the rear wiper, the not split rear window, so even though this is technically the better Prius, the best Prius ever made, I would never buy one of these. And in my head, the Prius died a long time ago. By a long time ago, I mean like 2022, whenever they discontinued the 4th generation. So that's a pretty bleak ending for this thing. And if you have one of these Priuses, don't feel bad. Again, any Prius on this list is better than the average, just normal Joe sedan car that you'd have out there. They're all Priuses. They're all fantastic cars. But compared against each other, a few stand out, and that's a 3rd and 4th gen. Now, I think I'm going to do a little bit of a bonus here. I'm going to rank every single generation, every single facelift of the Prius, so that we see which ones are my favorites and which ones I think are pretty bad. I am here, and we are going to be ranking the Prius generations and versions. Now, some of them I kept together, but I split all of them apart. So generations is not Prius C, Prius V, so we split all these apart, and we're going to be ranking them. Starting off with the 3rd and final facelift of the Prius C. This was an S-tier car right here. It was good looking. Unfortunately, I think the wheels were kind of ugly, but other than that, it was kind of okay. Now, the Prius Concept, the original one. The battery sucked, the drivetrain wasn't good, but I think it was a lot prettier than the 1st generation Prius actually turned out to be. So we'll put that A tier. There's also no selection bias here. There's not like, oh, well, the 1st generation Prius gets the best because it was the first. And also, we're ranking these across each other. You know, obviously, this Prius over here, the 2nd facelift of the Prius C, I thought was the ugliest Prius ever made. But that doesn't mean that it was a bad car. Compared to a Mitsubishi Mirage or any other hybrid from that time period, aside from other Priuses, I would have that car over any of them. It's fine mechanically. It's purely just over looks and placement. So this one gets probably higher than the 1st generation Toyota Prius, just because I think it looks prettier. The thing that I like about this one is that the lug nuts were hidden under the cap instead of being brought out like the original Prius. I also think that this front is a lot cuter than the front that the Prius eventually got with. This Prius is fine. I just prefer the looks of this one, you know, the aesthetics. I also like the cladding. I think the cladding was nice. But in the end, I think that this was the right decision because it's a new car. We don't want it to be all wacky. No one wants, you know, to look like you're driving a Heisenberg, like, blimp or something. Like, you want to drive a normal, nice car if you're taking a gamble on something. There's only so many gambles you can make. And with a first-generation car like this, I don't blame them for going with this design. Personally, the first-generation Prius, I think it would have looked better if they would have taken that design. Moving on to the Prius V, the final facelift, the 2nd facelift. Technically the first facelift, but, you know, the 2nd version. S tier. I mean, the final face, actually, A tier, because they moved the buttons on the steering wheel, and you couldn't control the climate from the steering wheel anymore, which is, kind of a crap move. The original Prius plug-in hybrid from early 2012, it's pretty good. It's a great car. I think we're going S tier with this one because you got like 12 miles on one charge, which was good. You could charge it at home. It was a very efficient little guy. Actually A tier. The only reason why I don't like it, I don't like the wheels. I don't like the silver bar on the front. And in the interior, they replaced one of the vents. Like they had this big long vent on the side, and they replaced it with like chrome or like plastic, and it said plug-in hybrid. It was really gaudy, and I didn't like that compared to the regular Prius. So that gets A tier. But mechanically, it was probably one of the best Priuses ever made. The 2022 Toyota Prius. I probably already mentioned this in the video. This is the first thing I'm making, by the way, before I've made the video, so I may repeat myself here and then. But I actually don't like this generation of Prius. It's my least favorite because of the headroom. They moved the peak of the roof back, which means you get less headroom in the front. It feels a lot more dingy, a lot more slow, bigger hood, smaller windows. So I'm going to say B tier. It's not bad, but it's fine. I also can't tell the difference between this and... Is there another one here? Yeah. I can't tell the difference between the plug-in and not plug-in, so we're just going to say that this one's the not plug-in. D tier. This car was fine. Mechanically, again, it was great, but the front of it was too aggressive, it was too gaudy, too thick. I couldn't appreciate it. But the 2019 update of the Prius goes up there because it added all-wheel drive. The first useful addition to the Prius since the plug-in in 2012. That's a pretty big accomplishment. This Prius, I really like The C and the V is great, trust me. When that V comes up here, trust me, you've got a spot on this list, my friend. But yeah, I like this one too, because this was like boiling down a Prius to what it is. It was weird, it was wacky, and it was a Prius. Like, I don't know how to explain it. The wackiness of the Prius is just in the way that the interior is, and the hatch, like the hatch design, the trunk. Everything about it is wacky in some way compared to a normal car. And I wouldn't buy it if it was just a gas car and it was just wacky. You know, but at the same time, it doesn't drive you away from it. Like, it's endearing, but you wouldn't want a Camry to be a Prius, if you know what I'm saying. Like, the wackiness of the Prius adds to it, which means technically this was one of the better Priuses ever, because this was the most wacky. They toned it down a lot for that one. They made this one look kind of crossover-ish. Now, normally I'd be kind of adverse to taking a car and making it look more like a crossover for consumers, but actually, instead of just sloppily glopping on whatever Toyota felt like glopping on, I thought they did a pretty tasteful job with this. You know, with the orange, that was a nice color. The snow, marketing it that way. The wheels, they were very classy. And again, they worked with the 4 lug nuts in a way that was possible without doing hubcaps. I would have preferred 5-spoke hubcaps just because I think 5 is prettier than 4. That's one thing I harp on about all the time. But I think that was actually a pretty good attempt on like the eco shit in other cars like that. Just B. Actually, the plug-in gets slightly higher than this one. I mean, it's just not a great car. You see, the roof is all the way back there, which means you have lower headroom in the driver passenger seat than you do in the rear seat. Well, like, why? Why am I preferring my rear seat passengers over my front seat passengers? This line over here is weird. The door handle in the back is weird. And it's like, compared to a normal Prius, like this guy, see, the peak was right above the driver's head. And it's not like this, it's not like the Prius needed to be any more aerodynamic. This generation had shutters in the grills that would open and close depending on if you needed the air or not to make it more aerodynamic. So there are things that you can do to a car without making it look like a teardrop, and I don't appreciate that. The Prime, this one gets like a B. Now, I prefer the plug-in over the Prime for a multitude of reasons. First of all, for the first 3 years of the Prime's life, it only had 4 seats. The first seat was blocked out with plastic and cup holders, and you couldn't fold it. That was weird. I don't know why they did that. That's just kind of ugly. The later Primes were okay, but, I mean, Prius Prime or the one with all-wheel drive, it's always the all-wheel drive is much better than the Prime. This also used a nickel metal battery instead of the lithium ion. So if you got an all-wheel drive version, you get the nickel metal. Why? Because it performed better in cold climates. I bet I've probably already said that in the video, but I'm saying it again. The 3rd generation facelift. This is better than the regular 3rd generation because it didn't have the same oil ring piston problems. But I'm still going to say A tier because, I mean, the 3rd gen was my favorite generation, and it was good all around. There wasn't a bad version of the 3rd generation. The original C. I think this is A tier too. Like, I prefer the facelift. This was pretty good, and this one down here, I mean, she was just not good. The Prius V, yeah, that's S tier, man. That thing, you got extra space in the back. It was very attractive. It had a 3rd row. And imagine if it had a 3rd row in the United States. It's so tempting to buy one of these and order the parts from Australia. Toyota, I think it was CMI Toyota in Adelaide, because my family lives in Adelaide. I've visited their dealership. They have a lot of cool cars over there. I should do a video on that. I haven't been there in a few years. They will actually sell you replacement rear seats for this, and I think it'd be so cool to install them in a US spec one. But I know it'd be just a pain through customs. Like, why do you have Toyota Prius seats, and what are you smuggling in them? It's like, well, then I don't care that much. The 3rd generation S tier. I mean, it fought off the inside. It was a good car. It was quiet on the inside. And, you know, it wasn't worse. Like, this wasn't a downgrade. And the 2nd generation, S tier. So let me just go over the tiers one more time, and then we'll finally do it. So the S tier. Prius C, because it was cute, it was nice, they did a good job rebranding it, and it was overall a really good small car. Like, before the Prius C, the only really redeemable part about it, because of the price and everything, was that it was hybrid. With this, compared to all the other small cars, this was the best. This thing was competing with, like, the Mitsubishi Mirage, and for the value for the money, this thing was way better, especially with the hybrid, than that thing would have been. Even if this thing wasn't a hybrid, it still would have been way better than the Mirage. It was just a good car. All-wheel drive in a Prius. I want one of these so bad. They're so functional, you know? And it doesn't take any range away from you normally, unless you're using the all-wheel drive a lot, because I believe you can just turn the all-wheel drive off, and it'll just operate like a normal Prius. And there's nothing different with this compared to a normal Prius. In fact, this thing had a slightly bigger battery that way you won't notice the range as much. Did make it a little bit heavier, but hey, better traction in the snow with that weight. So overall, Pretty good car here. Then we got the 4th gen original flavor. I just like the way this thing looks. It's so angular, it's so pretty, it's so Prius-y. You know, they took all the elements of the original Prius and the Prius family, now that it was probably dead by this point, you know, pretty much, I say probably, it was dead by this point, or at least dying out. And they just combined it into one car, and I love this generation forever. It had the best hubcaps of any generation. It was, aside from the 3rd gen, the V, because it was just a great Prius. I mean, if you wanted more out of your Prius, you get a V. You get more space in the back, you could get a 3rd row. Fog lights, mate, these things, you just can't beat them. The original 3rd gen, I mean, it was a great car. I mean, what can I say besides it was just an excellent, I own one of these. I own the facelift version down there. But, I mean, they're great cars. It's like the epitome of the where I think this is where the Priuses peaked. It kind of went down from here, you know. But I still like this generation. I like them both equally, even though I like the 3rd gen better. And the 2nd generation, if we look at all the generations, is the 2nd generation really that crazy if we remove all the features and what they look like and everything? No. It's like one of the worst Priuses. It's fine. I mean, it's the 2nd one ever created. But I'm going to love it because it made the Prius cool, and it made people hate the Prius, which only gave, you know, boosts engagement, which only made everything better. So, the 2nd generation, if you just put yourself in the Prius mindset, you put yourself in the TikTok mindset, it's actually pretty good. Then we've got, you know, in a concept, like that car, good car. The updated V, which is less than the original V, just because it looked a little bit angry, you know, and it got rid of the 3 vents, which was weird, and replaced it with the weird stuff. The interior in the V was always terrible. The Prius plug-in, that was like the best Prius, I think, probably. Even though I think the outside of it is one of the uglier Priuses. Just, I mean, come on, silver here, they had silver on the side, silver on the back, and it's just too much. Like, the Prius did a good job of balancing, I'm a hybrid, with I'm just a Toyota. And this was more, I'm a hybrid than Toyota, which was, like, weird. So, it was probably the best Prius ever made, like, plug-in, that wise. But, it was pretty good. Then we have the 3rd gen, which I have. I just don't like it as well. Like, this looks so happy. And this looks like, this is, like, the goth phase. You know what I'm saying here? Like, this is before the goth phase, and this is the goth phase. Like, you haven't changed anything. You're not that different. You're the same car. You just look a little bit more dramatic. You know what I'm saying? And then the Prius C. This was a good car. The hubcaps were great. It was nice. I mean, a lot of people love that car. Then we've got the original Prius. Nothing wrong with it. Compared to the other Priuses, it was fine. And also, this is, for a lot of people, where the Prius starts is the 2nd generation. No one knew that this thing even existed. I mean, we had the Insight 2 Electric Boogaloo with the 3rd gen, and that was able to fight off the Insight. This thing, I mean, it fought off the Insight, but just barely. Just barely. Essentially, the 1st generation Prius was just making the seat warm for the 2nd generation to come in, go gangbusters, kicks everyone ass, and take some names. This thing fought off the Insight. This thing just kind of proved that Toyota was right. It's not a bad car. It's an awesome piece of history. I just think the wheels are kind of ugly. And a touchscreen, though, it had a lot of neat things about it. I think this is the worst Prius generation. You know, like, they're good. If you just bought one of these cars, if you just went to the Toyota dealership, this is better than 99% of cars. The Prius is still my favorite car in Toyota's lineup. Don't get me wrong, aside from maybe the Sienna. Definitely not the Camry, though. It's still a great car. It's got a lot of the functionality of the Prius, but when you compare it to all of these, like, again, every single one of these cars, okay, I'm a little bit of a Prius fanboy here. Every single one of these cars compared to a normal car is going to be better. Like, would you rather have a Toyota Corolla or a Prius? Granted, the price differences there in the hybrid. You probably, if I said a Lexus LS or a Prius, most people would go for the LS. I'd probably go for the Prius. But it's still a fantastic car. Just compared to other Priuses, I mean, I'd rather have a 3rd gen than a 5th gen. Although 5 is a pretty number. It's my favorite number, so kudos for that. Then the Prime. I don't know, it was ugly around the back, it wasn't great around the front. Mechanically, it was fantastic, but they just had to ruin all the plugins with their crap. That's why I appreciate that they kept the plug-in and the regular one the same, and called it the plug-in, not the Prime. That just helps, you know, we don't need to be that crazy. And then the C down here, the updated C. I don't know what they were trying to do. I really don't know. This was kind of during before the SUV craze, like the sporty phase, and there's so much stuff about it that's just useless. Like, they've got these small little fog lights down here on this gigantic surround, just this gigantic plastic there, which isn't great. The turn signals are down here, which is kind of like the normal Prius, but it's too aggressive to actually look like the normal Prius. And, I mean, it's just kind of hard to look at. Like, when you're in traffic, you're at least me, I'm always looking up here for a turn signal, but you look down there, and, yeah. It's not a big deal, but I prefer my turn signals up there. Yeah, the 3rd generation was guilty of this, too. I believe believe they fixed it. No, yeah, they kept the turn signals down there. That always kind of annoyed me about my car. It's the only thing I didn't really like about it. You know, the headlights were really chunky. Like, they could have fit a turn signal in there. Like, there's nothing going on here, nothing around the side. There's nothing going on in headlights. And then it's got this small little weird little grill, and it's too sporty for the way that it looks. The interior and everything else was fine. I just think the front of it was kind of ugly. Anyway, that's my trailers to Priuses. Now going into the conclusion, I think. At least, I hope. Well, if you made it this long, congratulations. I'm so happy that I finally made this video. Also, I just want to say this because I just want to tie this up. You could have solar on the Prius Prime, just not the regular Prius with the 4th generation. Finally, that's it. I am so proud of this video. I used every single image, every single video, every single asset, every single talking point. I have a whiteboard over in my office that is more marked up than the CIA's whiteboard. If there was one whiteboard that they had to solve all their cases on, this whiteboard would be more wiped up than that. And you want to know, I'm so proud of this video because when I was an enthusiast looking for Prius content online, you had like Toyota Jeff. Okay, this is where I'm going to sound like a weird little nerd who's like, I like the Prius because I'm a weird little nerd who likes the Prius. And I would look for it, and there was just nothing there. There was no video like this. There was no complete history of the Prius. And now that the Prius just isn't doing great. Oh yeah, there was also the weird curved glass on the back of the Prime. I put this on there because I forgot to talk about the Prime a lot, so I'm getting that out of my system. But I have to genuinely say there's not a single fact, not a single thing in this video that I would have done differently. I've covered every single thing I wanted to cover. I've taken all the time I've needed to do it, and I think that when I'm dead and gone, this video will still be on YouTube after they discontinue this generation of the Prius or update it and make it worse, and people will still be thinking about the cold hard facts and everything that I told you about sales numbers and all from this video. Hopefully this video will be a source for someone, or maybe some people will watch it for 4 minutes, click off of it, or maybe you'll finish it in parts. However you got here, thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and trust me, you can expect a lot more of this out of the Common Quokka, because I'm not done and you shouldn't be either.